Hey there, fellow seekers. You know the drill. Hit that subscribe button if you want more deep dives like this one. Today, we're going to take a journey into the unexpected, the hidden struggles of spiritual growth. It's something that, not a lot of people like to talk about.
Yeah, because it's not always sunshine and rainbows.
Right. Yeah, it's not all, meditation and good vibes.
Exactly.
There are some pretty intense inner realities that we have to confront.
For sure.
Talking things like ego death.
Yeah.
Which can feel like your whole world is falling apart. Like everything you thought you knew about yourself and, the universe is suddenly in question.
Absolutely.
And then there's shadow work.
Oh, yeah, that's a fun one.
Which can be a real trip. It's about facing those parts of ourselves that we tend to hide. The fears, the insecurities, the imperfections, all the stuff we've been taught to kind of suppress.
The less than perfect stuff.
Yeah.
All the things we don't like to look at.
Right. And to make things even more, kind of complex. There's this feeling of emotional isolation that can sometimes come with these shifts.
Yeah, because as your perspective evolves, sometimes your old connections, they don't really resonate the same way.
If you're speaking a different language almost.
Exactly, and not everyone's fluent.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And we're going to unpack all of this today. We've got some really interesting sources. We've got a couple of YouTube videos that we dug up that talk about some really interesting stuff. We've got Carl Jung. We're going to talk about ego death. We've got some practical tips for navigating these challenges. And our goal really is to help you guys understand this complex terrain of spiritual growth and maybe give you some tools to help you navigate it with, more awareness and grace.
Because even though it's tough, it ultimately leads to, I think a richer, more meaningful experience of life.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
So let's just dive right in. Let's start with Carl Jung and his concept of the shadow self. And what I find really fascinating about this is that Jung, who, for those who don't know, he's the founder of analytical psychology. He didn't see the shadow self as something inherently bad or evil.
Yeah, he was way ahead of his time with that. He just saw it as, those unconscious aspects of ourselves, the parts we tend to reject or deny.
Stuff we try to hide.
Exactly. And he actually believed that, to become whole, we need to integrate those parts, not pretend they don't exist.
Right, like not push it down further.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he has this great quote, "There is no light without shadow and no psychic wholeness without imperfection."
Love that quote.
It's really about embracing the full spectrum of who we are, the good, the bad, the ugly.
The whole thing, yeah. And that's where the shadow work comes in. It's really about bringing those hidden parts into the light of consciousness, understanding them, and integrating them into our sense of self.
Not getting rid of them.
No, just accepting them, understanding them. Right, exactly.
And that can be messy, uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah.
But it's so crucial for, personal growth.
Yeah, it's like the path to wholeness isn't always comfortable.
Not at all.
So this makes me think of another concept, the dark night of the soul. Is that similar to dealing with our shadow self, or is it something different?
It's definitely connected, but dark night of the soul really refers more to like a period of intense inner turmoil and spiritual crisis. It's like that moment where you feel like the rug has been pulled out from under you.
Yeah.
And everything you thought you knew about yourself and the world is just falls apart.
So it's like ego death.
Yep.
We were talking about earlier, that feeling of your sense of self just completely dissolving.
Yes, exactly. And it can be really painful, really disorienting.
Right.
But the thing is, it's often a necessary stage in spiritual growth.
Right. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, even though it feels really awful.
Right.
It's like that analogy of the caterpillar.
Yes.
Turning into the butterfly.
Yeah. It has to break down its old form in order to emerge as something new and beautiful.
You got it. And you know what? That process of breaking down can often lead to a feeling of isolation, which is kind of ironic, right?
Yeah. It's like you're seeking connection, but then you feel more alone than ever.
Exactly.
And one of the YouTube videos we were looking at actually talked about the importance of solitude during this time. It's the idea that solitude can create space for introspection and questioning your core beliefs.
There's a quote, and I love this quote. It's by Jean-Paul Sartre. He says, "If you're lonely when you're alone, you're in bad company."
Wow.
So it's really about embracing solitude, not as a punishment, but as a tool for self-discovery.
I like that. So it's not about isolating yourself from other people necessarily. It's about using solitude to really get to know yourself better.
Exactly. Yeah. And, even though solitude is important, It's also crucial to remember that you don't have to go through this alone. Seeking support, finding like-minded individuals or communities, spiritual communities, can be really, really valuable.
Yeah, so it's about finding that balance
Always finding the balance.
between the inner work and the outer connection.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a really important takeaway.
Yeah.
And finding that balance can be, I think, one of the most challenging aspects of this whole journey.
Oh, for sure. One of many challenges.
Welcome back to our deep dive into, the kind of unexpected terrain of spiritual growth.
Yeah, we're picking up where we left off, kind of exploring those less discussed aspects, the shadows, the challenges that can come up.
Yeah, those hurdles, those bumps in the road. And hey, if you're just tuning in, definitely go back and catch the first part of this deep dive to get the full context.
Yeah, for sure. So, we were talking about that balance between solitude and connection, which is something that keeps coming up.
All right. And speaking of challenges, one that really stood out to me was the idea of heightened sensitivity. One of the YouTube videos even described it as like tuning into a previously unknown frequency, which I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty intense to me.
It definitely can be. Imagine like suddenly becoming aware of all these like energies and emotions that you were completely oblivious to before. It's like your senses are amplified.
So it's not just about being more empathetic or sensitive to other people's feelings.
Well, yeah, it's definitely that, but it goes beyond emotions. It's like you might feel this deeper connection with nature. You start noticing the energy of different spaces, or even become sensitive to things like, light and sound.
Wow, so it could be really overwhelming.
Yeah.
But also, I imagine, pretty amazing at times.
Totally. Like, it's like you have access to this whole new dimension of experience. But it can be, yeah, like you said, a lot to handle. That's why finding ways to cope is really, really crucial.
Okay, so what are some things people can do? If they're experiencing this heightened sensitivity, like, how do you navigate that?
Well, I think mindfulness practices are super helpful. Things like meditation, grounding exercises, spending time in nature. Those can really help you kind of stay centered and manage that influx of energy.
So, like, learning to adjust the volume, I guess, on your
Right.
senses.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing that's really important is setting boundaries. It's okay to say no to things that feel draining, things that feel overwhelming.
And just prioritize your own well-being.
Always.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, another challenge that we touched upon earlier was this whole concept of the dark night of the soul. And I got to say, it sounds pretty scary, to be honest. Can you maybe elaborate on what that experience might feel like for someone who's going through it?
Yeah, sure. The dark night of the soul, it's often described as like this period of like really deep spiritual crisis. It's a feeling of emptiness, disconnection, and a loss of meaning in life. Almost like everything you once believed in has just like crumbled around you.
So like a spiritual existential crisis.
In a way, yeah. It's a time of intense questioning, doubt, even despair, and you can feel like you're just lost in this like dark forest, no way out.
That sounds really, really tough.
Yeah, it can be. But it's super important to remember that this is a natural part of the spiritual process. It's like a shedding of old identities and beliefs that no longer serve us. So it's making space for something new.
Oh, I see. So it's like, even though it feels terrible, it's actually a good thing in the long run.
It's like, remember the caterpillar and the butterfly?
Oh, yeah, right. Okay, I get it.
Got to break down the old form in order to emerge as something new.
That's such a powerful metaphor. Now, one of the most fascinating aspects of this whole spiritual growth thing, to me, is this idea of physical manifestations. Like, our bodies can actually react to these shifts in consciousness. How does that even work? Like, what are some of the ways that might show up?
Well, it can be different for everyone, but some common experiences are like changes in your sleep patterns, energy fluctuations, tingling sensations, sometimes even like physical discomfort, headaches, or even like flea-like symptoms.
Wait, so getting sick could actually be a sign of spiritual growth?
I mean, it's not about being sick in the traditional sense. It's more like your body releasing old energies and kind of adjusting to these new frequencies, like a realignment.
And sometimes realigning means going through a bit of discomfort.
Sometimes, yeah.
Just like our bodies are catching up to our expanding consciousness.
Yes, precisely. And there's this quote, I love it, it's from Hildegard von Bingen. And she says, "We are not just a physical body, but also a reflection of the divine."
Wow, that's beautiful.
Right. So it's a reminder that our physical and spiritual selves, they're like deeply interconnected.
So as we're, kind of going on this spiritual journey, it's important to remember to honor our bodies, take care of them.
Absolutely. There are vessels in this life.
Yeah, our companions.
Totally. And, just like we talked about that balance between solitude and connection, we also need to find balance between our inner and outer world.
Between the spiritual and the physical.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about, heightened sensitivity, dark night of the soul, physical manifestations. Are there any other, challenges that you think our listeners should be aware of as they're kind of navigating their own growth?
Well, one that can be kind of sneaky is this illusion of spiritual superiority. It's really easy to fall into this trap of believing that because you're on this spiritual path, that you're somehow better than others.
Oh, that's interesting. You'd think it would be the opposite.
You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But it's really common, as you start to kind of awaken to these new perspectives, these deeper truths, it's easy to get caught up in the sense of, knowing. And then it leads to judgment and separation.
So how do we avoid that? How do we stay humble on this path?
I think humility is key, remembering that we're all on our own unique journey, and there's no right way to do it. There's no, finish line.
No point where you've, arrived.
Right, exactly. It's a constant process, always learning, growing, expanding. We're all just students.
Students in the school of life.
Exactly. And the more we can embrace that, the more compassionate and understanding we'll become.
Towards ourselves and others.
Exactly. It's about remembering that we're all connected. We're all part of this web of life.
I love that. This has been such a, rich conversation. I'm really starting to grasp the complexities, the nuances of this journey. It's definitely not for the faint of heart, but it sounds incredibly rewarding.
It is. And even though it can be tough, challenging, it's a journey that leads us back to ourselves, to our true nature, to a deeper connection with the world around us.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the, sometimes unexpected and challenging aspects of spiritual growth.
Yeah, we've talked about a lot, those shadowy parts, the bumps in the road, and even how it can show up physically in our bodies.
Right. But let's shift gears a little bit and talk about, okay, so how do we actually navigate this? What are the practical things we can do to, come out stronger on the other side of all this?
Good question. And I think those YouTube videos we've been looking at, they offer some really good strategies. We've touched on some of them, mindfulness, seeking support. But let's dive a little deeper.
Okay, yeah, ready.
One of the most important things, and I think sometimes the most overlooked, is self-compassion.
Okay.
Treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer to a close friend.
Yeah. So, cutting yourself some slack because you're not always going to get it right.
Totally. You're going through a huge transformation, and it's not always going to be, pretty or easy. So just embrace those imperfections, those setbacks, the moments of doubt. It's all part of it.
It's giving ourselves permission to be human, even when we're trying to, reach for something more.
Exactly. And that brings us to mindfulness, which I think is so, so important. It's about, being present in the moment with our thoughts and feelings, not judging them, just observing.
So, being present with what is without getting lost in the story about it.
Yeah, exactly. It creates that little bit of space between us and our reactions. It allows us to respond to the tough stuff with a little more wisdom, I guess. It's like hitting pause before we react.
Yeah, that space to choose how we want to respond.
Exactly.
I could see how that would be so helpful in navigating some of this stuff.
Oh, totally. And then, of course, there's the power of asking for help.
Yeah.
Finding support. You don't have to do this alone. Connecting with other people who get it.
Yeah, finding your tribe.
Exactly. Whether it's, through a spiritual community or a support group. Even just having one friend you can really talk to.
Someone who can just listen.
Yeah. That can make all the difference.
It's like having a team of cheerleaders, mentors, and fellow travelers kind of supporting you along the way.
I love that.
This whole conversation has really shifted my perspective. It's not about achieving some perfect state of enlightenment. It's about embracing the whole mess.
The good, the bad.
Yeah. It's about that constant evolution,
Well said. It's about acknowledging, the full human experience, the light, the shadow, the joy, the sorrow, and finding that wisdom and compassion within all of it.
Okay, so as we kind of wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what's the one thing you really want our listeners to remember?
I think it's just to embrace the journey,
Right.
Spiritual growth. It's an adventure. It's full of twists and turns, ups and downs, and it's not about arriving somewhere. It's about enjoying the ride.
Learning along the way.
Exactly.
I love that. And as always, we want to hear from you guys. our amazing listeners. What resonated with you in this deep dive? What are your own experiences with, the unexpected struggles of spiritual growth?
Yeah, share your thoughts, your insights, your questions in the comments. We love hearing from you, love learning from your perspectives.
Absolutely. And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more conversations just like this one.
More deep dives.
Exactly. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep embracing this incredible journey of spiritual growth.
See you on the next deep dive.